We love its smoothness, we adore the look of it. How are golden nibs made? Let's discover. Hey Goodfellas, I'm Naldi and we are at Style of Zug. When we speak about fountain pens, the heart of it and the most important element is without doubt the golden nib. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it has a certain kind of feedback, depending on the manufacturer you're buying the fountain pen from. What's sure is that we really appreciate the craft that is behind the making of this wonderful element. So I thought that after analyzing reasons why a fountain pen can cost $800 or more, where I also kind of mentioned how a golden nib is being made, we should dive deeper into this specific subject. Because I mean, at the end of the day, this is what is touching the paper and making our dreams a reality. And first of all, I think that it's extremely important that we understand that creating nibs is a know-how that only few manufacturers around the world have, especially when it comes to golden nibs. So it's not just something that anyone can do. It requires years and years of know-how, of research and development, and you probably must also have years of testing about the performance of the nib, the performance of the feed, which we'll analyze also later on. Which are some brands that have this specific know-how in-house? We could talk about Aurora, about Namiki, about Sailor, Mont Blanc, Pelikan. Then there's the producers such as Bock and Jovo, which are based in Germany and have a huge know-how and usually develop and then produce the nibs for different manufacturers all around the world. We have different steps that we need to analyze in order to understand how much effort is put into the making of a nib. So let's dive deeper into it right now and start with step number one, raw material. Because it all starts in owning and purchasing the material in order to do the nibs. And in addition to that, the manufacturer that produces its own nibs also needs to have the gold pressed and cut and put on a roll or on a flat plate in order that they can punch out the shape. We're gonna come at this because this is step number two. Now, the important thing to understand is that there is probably no one that sells those kind of rolls that, for example, Mont Blanc uses in order to punch out then the shape of the nib. And even these very thin layers of gold for the nibs are not something that you go somewhere and say, yeah, please, can you give me 10 of this so I can produce 500 nibs? No, it's something that you probably need to produce up front and have them in stock so that you can take those out and then create the stamps of your nibs. You get supplied the raw material and then the producer needs to have the machines or a partner that is able to create the exact component that is going to be used as a base to then cut out the shape of the nib and then creating the nib afterwards. And I mean, depending on the manufacturer, we're probably talking about a thickness of 0.1 or 0.2 millimeters. So you also understand that probably having a roll with a thinner plate is better because a large golden plate would probably be too loose. However, I know that both of these things exist and it's the first complication when it comes to producing a nib. The step number two then is punching out the shape of the nib. And so what happens is very easy, is that with a form, the shape of the nib is being punched out with a metal mask from the thin golden plate. And then that delivers the flat shape of the nib. And you can see that the breather hole and the base of the nib are already being punched out accordingly with this first step. Which brings us then to step number three, the embossing of the nib. And the interesting thing here is that before one can emboss the nib, one has to create the stamp of the nib design. One thing is the precision that is required in order to emboss the nib in a nice way. But the real magic happens when it comes to creating the handmade engraved stamp that will be used as a cliché for the design of the nib. And in addition to that, you can imagine that such a stamp will wear out the more you use it. And that's exactly what happens. One stamp can be used for around 8 hours of nib production. A after which it must be replaced and created a new stamp. So I've tried to calculate this a bit. It might take circa 10 seconds to emboss a nib, as they probably stay on this flat golden nib for a few seconds in order for the design really to take shape into the gold, which in 8 hours it would mean that with one of this stamp you should be able to create around 2,880 nibs. I'm guessing here, which then means that for a limited edition of 4,810 pieces you'll need to create 2 hand engraved stamps. I think that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Now every time I'm gonna look at one of those limited edition, I'm gonna look at it with different eyes. So now you're saying that after this step the nib still looks flat, it's kind of strange and unusable. What do we do now? Step number 4, we start bending the nib. So the moment has arrived to actually shape the nib and give it the rounded attire in order to then having the desired shape and being able to apply it on the feed that will then deliver the ink. So the flat nib is being put on a metal base and then gently bended into the renowned shape we know of the nibs that we mostly use. And I hope you're enjoying until now all these steps to create such an amazing golden nib. If you're liking this content so far, and if you've maybe watched several of my videos already, maybe you haven't subscribed yet, so why don't you consider hitting the subscribe button? There's a lot of content that is coming up, and I thank you at this stage and welcome to this amazing community of Goodfellas. And then, as a step number 5, one of the most complicated and difficult steps of nib making is setting the iridium point here on the tip of the nib. Now you have to know that iridium is extremely difficult to melt. It is a material that has a very high melting point and it's hard to form, machine or work it. And it's also one of the rarest elements that you can find on the earth. So they attach a tiny pellet of iridium to the tip of the golden nib. This is usually done using a welding or brazing process where the iridium gets heated together with the gold until these two metals fuse together. Interesting thing is that one of the reasons why both of these materials are being used is that it's one of the most corrosion resistant materials on earth. So this is extremely important because usually this material is always in contact with the ink. The gold provides the smoothness, the flexibility of the nib, and the iridium point makes sure that we have a material on the tip that doesn't let the nib wear out over the years. And I'm pretty sure that this is the step where the size of the nib gets decided, because they're going to apply an iridium point that has a specific size. Imagine about the precision of these very, very tiny and small iridium points that are being applied on the nib. Step number 6 is cutting the slit. But how can you cut something that has such a hard material as iridium at the point? Well, you need an even harder material. And which one is harder than iridium? It's diamond. So they actually use a diamond blade. And if you look up close and a bit slower, when the diamond blade starts cutting the iridium, it gets heated up to the point that it becomes reddish for a very quick second. And then, of course, when it reaches the gold, it is smooth as butter when cutting the slit. Step number 7, tuning the nib. It's all about tuning the nib and making sure that the writing performance is at the highest level of quality and experience. That's made on a grinding machine that turns super fast, and the nib is being smoothened by making a nade on this machine. I had the chance to see this in Hamburg a few years ago at Mont Blanc, and also I had the chance to try it out on a metal nib. And I mean, you need really to be talented, to be super precise, and more than that, you need years of practice. That's why people at Mont Blanc that do this kind of work usually have 15 years and more of experience and that are there since forever. And believe me, they love what they do because they really have a know-how that is one of a kind. Step number 8 is then plating. You know that a lot of nibs have this two-tone look, which is purely aesthetical. And to create such a wonderful plating and such a wonderful design, a mask must be applied on the nib in order to cover the part that is required to remain yellow gold. Then it's dipped into a bath, often called electroplating, and in this process, the object to be plated is submerged in a solution containing the plating metal, where via electric current metal form a thin layer that gives the rhodium color and layer on the nib. And we go further to step number 9, assembling the writing unit. So now the nib is being assembled with the feet that can be in ebonite or plastic, and then directly installed into the grip section, or in case of Mont Blanc or Autoroute or also Pelican, it is being held firmly and tightly by a holder element that will then be installed or screwed in into the grip section. Step number 10, and also the last step, is then the quality control. Now, the nib is finished and it would be ready to be assembled into the writing instrument. But before this is being done, a last writing test is being made so that the brand can ensure that all the steps have been made at the highest standard required by these incredible manufacturers, and so they can ensure that the ink flow is good and that the interplay between the nib, the feed, and the point is absolutely flawless. Well, Goodfellas, I hope you enjoyed discovering all the steps about nib making. I actually enjoy talking about it, and also while I talk, I understand how much effort goes into the making of such an incredible nib. In one of my next videos, we're going to analyze together the anatomy of a fountain pen and of a nib, what the name are of each single part of a writing instrument and of a nib, and that's gonna also be super interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more content that is coming up very soon, and as usual, don't forget that together we are changing the game.